After corn husks served their purpose in the kitchen, another remarkable dried item stepped into the spotlight: dried mushrooms. In times when resources were scarce, Americans turned to the forest for food, and mushrooms became a surprising but vital find. Wild mushrooms, like morels, chanterelles, and porcini, were foraged from wooded areas during the short seasons they were available. But since these mushrooms spoiled quickly, families preserved them through careful drying, often threading them with a needle and string and hanging them by the fireplace or in the kitchen window, where the heat and air circulation worked together to dry them naturally. Dried mushrooms were prized not only for their long shelf life, but also for their rich, earthy flavor that added depth to even the simplest meals. When rehydrated in hot water, they expanded and released a flavorful broth, which was often used as a base for soups, gravies, and stews. During hard times, when meat was a luxury, dried mushrooms brought an almost meaty texture and umami taste to the table, making them a favorite among resourceful cooks. What made them even more valuable was their health benefit. Mushrooms are rich in B vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, essential for staying strong during challenging periods. And because they were free for those willing to forage, they were the perfect solution for struggling families looking to stretch their meals without spending a penny. In many regions, families passed down knowledge of mushroom identification, a skill that could literally mean the difference between a nourishing meal and a dangerous mistake. This practice connected generations and helped communities survive on nature's hidden gifts. Dried mushrooms weren't just food. They were a reminder of nature's resilience and how careful observation and patience could turn something wild into a dependable pantry item. In the story of survival, they represent how deeply intertwined people were with the land and how even the forest floor offered sustenance when times grew tough. After mushrooms, let's turn to something even more surprising: dried corn silk. Yes, those delicate golden threads found beneath the husk of a corn cob weren't just discarded during hard times in America. In fact, corn silk was valued for both its medicinal and practical uses, especially when resources were scarce and nothing could go to waste. During the Great Depression and earlier rural eras, families would carefully collect and dry corn silk in the sun or near wood stoves. Once dried, it could be stored in jars and used throughout the year. One of its most common uses was as a natural tea. Boiled in water, corn silk tea was believed to have diuretic properties and was often used to relieve urinary tract issues, kidney problems, and swelling. Old herbal remedies passed through generations highlighted its gentle healing effects, and in communities without access to doctors or medicine, this simple tea was a trusted home remedy. But corn silk didn't stop there. Some resourceful folks even added it to tobacco blends when tobacco was unaffordable or used it in folk healing poultices. Its role went beyond food. It was a symbol of survival ingenuity, showing how Americans made use of every part of their harvest. The best part? Corn silk was essentially free, a byproduct of a staple crop, transformed into something useful through patience and tradition. Drying corn silk might have seemed like a small act, but it reflects the larger spirit of resilience and waste-not living that defined those hard times. Even today, herbalists and natural health enthusiasts recognize the value of corn silk, and its story reminds us that sometimes the things we're quickest to throw away may be the most powerful when times get tough. After corn silk, let's peel back time to uncover another surprising dried treasure: dried apple peels. In hard times across rural America, nothing was wasted, not even the skin of an apple. While the fruit was eaten fresh, turned into pies, or preserved, the peels were carefully saved, dried, and repurposed. Families understood that even the outer layers held nutritional value, packed with fiber, antioxidants, and subtle flavor. Drying apple peels was simple. As women and children prepared apple for canning or pie making, they'd neatly arrange the peels on clean cloths or string them across the windowsill, letting the sun and air do the rest. Once fully dried, these colorful curls were stored in cloth sacks or glass jars, ready to be used in various creative ways. One of the most common uses was making apple peel tea, a warm, soothing drink that required nothing more than hot water and dried peels. During cold winters, this tea provided not only a gentle fruity taste, but also comfort and hydration when little else was available. Some even added cinnamon or clove if spices were on hand, giving it a festive warmth despite lean conditions. But dried apple peels served more than just tea. In many homes, they were added to porridge, baked into bread for extra aroma, or simmered into syrups and broths for a hint of apple essence. Nothing went to waste. These clever uses reflected the deep resourcefulness of Depression-era households, where every bit of nutrition mattered and every scrap had a second life. Beyond practicality, the scent of drying apple peels in a warm kitchen carried a certain emotional comfort, a reminder of harvest, family, and resilience. In the story of American survival foods, dried apple peels represent not just nourishment, but a mindset, making the most of what you have and finding warmth in the simplest things. From dried apple peels to the most overlooked parts of everyday vegetables, nothing went to waste in hard times. And that brings us to another forgotten staple, dried carrot tops. In Depression-era America, survival meant using every part of the harvest. Carrot greens, often thrown away today, were seen as valuable sources of nutrition. Families would gather the fresh, feathery green tops, carefully wash and dry them, and then hang them in bunches in warm, dry places, usually near wood-burning stoves or in attics, until they were crisp and ready for storage. Why carrot tops? Surprisingly, they're rich in vitamins A, C, K, and essential minerals like potassium and calcium. Dried carrot greens were commonly crumbled and used much like herbs, sprinkled into soups, broths, stews, and even homemade bread for added flavor and nutrition. They had a slightly bitter, earthy taste, which complemented heartier dishes during cold months when fresh vegetables were scarce. These greens also became an important tea base. Steeped in hot water, they created a tonic believed to aid digestion and boost the immune system, a simple home remedy passed down through generations. In resourceful kitchens, nothing was wasted. The drying of carrot tops was more than a thrifty trick. It was a lifestyle built on respect for food and gratitude for the land. Families who grew their own gardens often saved and reused seeds, composted scraps, and dried every usable green. In fact, these drying practices taught people to observe closely, appreciate quietly, and waste nothing. Dried carrot tops remind us of a time when people looked at food not just as a meal, but as a means of survival, turning even the most modest leaves into something nourishing. And in today's world, that kind of ingenuity feels more relevant than ever. Continuing from the resourceful use of dried carrot tops, another dried staple that helped American families during hard times was dried orange peels. While fresh oranges were considered a luxury for many, the peels themselves became a valuable ingredient that added flavor, nutrition, and a touch of zest to otherwise simple meals. Dried orange peels were prized not just for their bright citrus aroma, but also for their practical uses. Families would carefully peel oranges and hang the peels to dry in kitchens or sunlit windows. Once dried, these peels could be stored for months without losing their essential oils or flavor. This preservation method allowed households to enjoy the taste and health benefits of oranges long after the fresh fruit was gone. Nutritionally, dried orange peels offered a surprising boost. Rich in vitamin C and antioxidants, they helped support immune health, crucial during times when fresh produce was scarce. The peels were often ground into a powder and added to teas or baked goods, providing a natural flavor enhancer and a vitamin-rich supplement. In cooking, dried orange peels were used to brighten stews, sauces, and even preserved meats. Their unique bittersweet flavor balanced heavier ingredients, making meals more palatable and enjoyable. In some regions, dried orange peels were also candied or sweetened as a treat, offering a small luxury in difficult times. Beyond the kitchen, dried orange peels were valued for their aromatic qualities. They were commonly used in homemade potpourris or as natural air fresheners, lending a fresh scent to homes that might otherwise smell of dampness or smoke. In essence, dried orange peels symbolize how Americans maximized every part of their food resources, turning what might seem like waste into something valuable and versatile. This simple practice reflects the resilience and ingenuity that define survival during hard times. As we move further into the list of forgotten yet vital survival foods, let's talk about something often overlooked but incredibly resourceful: dried meat scraps. In times of scarcity, especially during the Great Depression and wartime rationing, no part of a meal went to waste. After slicing and preserving the best cuts of meat, families saved even the smallest trimmings, fatty ends, chewy bits, and bone-adjacent scraps. These were carefully dried, often by air or near a low fire, to create long-lasting, protein-rich additions to meals. What made dried meat scraps so important was their versatility. Once dried, they could be rehydrated and added to soups, stews, or broths to impart deep, smoky flavor and essential calories. Even a handful could elevate a pot of beans or a vegetable dish, turning something simple into a hearty, satisfying meal. In rural kitchens, these scraps were sometimes ground into powder and mixed with flour to flavor biscuits or gravy. But it wasn't just about survival. It was about respect for resources. Every ounce of food had value. Families knew how to stretch a single animal across many meals, and dried meat scraps were a clever, efficient way to make the most out of limited supplies. Different regions used scraps from whatever meat was most available: pork in the South, beef in the Midwest, and even game meats in more remote areas. These dried bits offered not only nutrition but a taste of comfort, a memory of better times captured in flavor. In a world without modern refrigeration, dried meat scraps were a reminder of traditional knowledge, skills passed from one generation to the next about preserving, preparing, and appreciating every part of what the land and livestock provided. Up next, we'll explore another overlooked yet practical dried item that helped American families stay nourished through lean times. And continuing with another often overlooked but highly resourceful food item: dried potato skins. In today's world, potato peels are usually discarded without a second thought. But during hard times in America, especially during the Great Depression and wartime rationing, families knew how to extract value from every part of their food, and that included the humble potato skin. After peeling potatoes for stews or boiling, the skins were not thrown away. Instead, they were carefully washed, spread out in thin layers, and left to dry in the sun or near the hearth. Once fully dried, they were stored in paper sacks or glass jars, ready to be rehydrated and used when food supplies ran low. Dried potato skins were surprisingly versatile. They could be reboiled and mashed into other dishes or pan-fried into crispy toppings. Some families ground them into a powder to thicken soups or mix into doughs for a starchy boost. And thanks to the skin being rich in fiber, iron, and potassium, it was not only a way to stretch meals, it was nutritious too. One forgotten but clever use was turning dried peels into snacks by brushing them with fat, adding salt or dried herbs, and roasting them until crisp. This gave families a flavorful treat when luxuries were scarce. What made dried potato skins especially symbolic of those times was the mindset behind them. Nothing went to waste. Every scrap was preserved, repurposed, and turned into something useful. It was a quiet form of resilience that passed from one generation to the next. So while it may sound simple today, back then, dried potato skins were a creative and meaningful way to survive. And they serve as another reminder of the incredible resourcefulness that defined America's hardest days, turning even the peels of a potato into something with value. After the value of orange peels and potato skins, let's now turn to something that most people today might simply throw away: the corn cob. But during America's hardest times, even this leftover piece of the corn plant was seen as a resource, not waste. Once the kernels were removed for drying or grinding, the cobs themselves were carefully saved. Why? Because dried corn cobs had a surprising number of practical uses that made life a bit more manageable for struggling families. For one, they were excellent kindling. In rural kitchens and wood stoves, Corn cobs were prized for how quickly they caught fire and how cleanly they burned. A perfect solution for homes trying to conserve every bit of firewood. But the usefulness didn't stop there. In some households, dried cobs were crushed and used as filler in animal feed, especially for pigs and chickens. They provided bulk and fiber without costing a cent. In certain areas, they were even ground into rough grit for cleaning pots and pans, a sort of homemade scouring tool when soap and scrubbers were scarce. There are also more unconventional uses. Resourceful folks used dried corn cobs to make insulation for small spaces, or even carve them into toys or homemade tools for farm use. Nothing went to waste. And in frontier days, there are even tales of them being used as makeshift stoppers, holders, and yes, even early household hygiene tools when paper wasn't available. Though it may sound strange today, the dried corn cob was a humble hero of the homestead. Versatile, free, and available in abundance. It's a symbol of how ingenuity turned even the most overlooked part of the harvest into something practical and essential. In the American story of survival, dried corn cobs remind us that during hard times, every little thing had a purpose, even the parts most would discard. After dried corn cobs came another surprisingly versatile staple, dried winter squash. In hard times, especially during the Great Depression and wartime rationing, nothing from the harvest went to waste. Winter squash, like butternut, acorn, and Hubbard varieties, were prized not only for their thick skins and long storage life, but also for how well they could be preserved through drying. Families would slice the dense, orange flesh into thin strips and lay them out in the sun or hang them in airy kitchens near wood-burning stoves. As the moisture slowly evaporated, the squash would shrink and toughen, concentrating its natural sugars and nutrients. Once dried, it could be stored in cloth sacks or sealed jars and rehydrated later for cooking. What made dried winter squash especially valuable was its dual nature. It was both food and flavor. When rehydrated and simmered, it added a comforting sweetness and earthy depth to soups, stews, and porridges. It blended well with dried beans, cornmeal, and herbs, making it a backbone ingredient for budget-friendly meals. In some communities, squash strips were lightly roasted before drying, creating a chewy snack or an addition to trail food. Others ground the dried pieces into a coarse powder that could be used in baking or thickening gravies, a practical trick passed down through generations. Dried squash also had medicinal value in traditional households. Some families believed its rich fiber and beta-carotene helped boost strength during flu seasons and hard winters. And since squash seeds were often saved and dried separately, this humble vegetable supported food security beyond a single season. In times when grocery store access was limited and gardens were lifelines, dried winter squash offered a colorful, vitamin-rich solution. Its ability to feed a family long after the harvest was a testament to the ingenuity of American households that learned to stretch every harvest, every bite, and every season. After dried winter squash came another humble yet powerful ally in hard times, dried bread. In an era where nothing could be wasted, every stale or leftover slice found a second purpose. For many American families during the Great Depression and wartime rationing, dry bread was a symbol of resourcefulness, a way to stretch food and ensure every crumb served a purpose. Rather than tossing old loaves, households would slice or cube the bread and let it dry slowly on windowsills, near the stove, or in low-heat ovens. Once thoroughly dried, it could be stored for months in cloth sacks or glass jars without the risk of molding. This dried bread became the base for some of the most comforting and creative meals, from savory bread puddings and stuffings to breakfast scrambles and even thickening agents for stews. What made dried bread truly vital was its adaptability. Rural families might mix it with garden herbs and drippings for a hearty stuffing, while urban dwellers often soaked it in milk or broth and fried it with onions and eggs, transforming scraps into satisfying dishes. In many ways, dried bread was a quiet hero of the kitchen, adding bulk and substance to meals when fresh ingredients were scarce. Beyond utility, there was something emotional tied to it too. The smell of toasted bread scraps in a wood-burning stove often brought a sense of warmth and memory to struggling homes. It was more than food. It was tradition, continuity, and proof that even the simplest things could offer comfort. Dried bread reminds us how American households, with creativity and grit, turned every possible item into nourishment. In today's world of convenience and excess, it's a meaningful lesson in frugality, flavor, and respect for food that our ancestors understood deeply. And now, we reach the final entry in this journey through America's most vital dried survival foods, dried wheat bran. While it might sound humble, this often overlooked byproduct of wheat milling was a powerhouse of nutrition and resilience during hard times. Wheat bran is the hard outer layer of the wheat kernel, the part usually removed to make white flour. But in the Great Depression era and earlier, nothing went to waste. Families knew the value of wheat bran, rich in fiber, magnesium, and B vitamins. It played an essential role in maintaining digestive health and providing energy when diets were limited. People would collect wheat bran directly from mills or save it from home-ground wheat. Once dried and stored, it became incredibly versatile. Housewives used it to stretch baked goods like muffins, breads, and pancakes. Bran was also added to cereals or hot porridge for a filling and affordable meal. Its fibrous texture gave a hearty feel to food that might otherwise be too plain or sparse. In rural communities, dried wheat bran had other uses too. It was sometimes soaked and used as animal feed, ensuring that even livestock received some nutrition. In colder months, people mixed it into stews to bulk them up or used it as a thickening agent when flour ran short. Dried wheat bran symbolizes the ingenuity of past generations, a reminder that even what others discarded became fuel for survival. It teaches us that strength during struggle often comes from reimagining the ordinary. Before we wrap up, if you found this series eye-opening and valuable, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more lost stories of America's golden era back to life. And don't forget, the first part of this video is already live on our channel under the title Golden Era USA. Go check it out and experience the full picture of how America survived its toughest times. As we continue exploring the dried staples that sustained America through hard times, we come to something often thrown away today, but once seen as a valuable resource: dried eggshells. Yes, you heard that right. In the frugal households of Depression-era America, even eggshells were never wasted. Families understood that survival wasn't just about what filled your stomach. It was also about preserving every possible source of nutrition. And dried eggshells, surprisingly, played a powerful role in that mission. After eggs were used for cooking or baking, the shells were carefully rinsed and set aside to dry, either on windowsills, stovetops, or in the warmth of the sun. Once fully dried, they were crushed into a fine powder using a mortar and pestle or even a rolling pin wrapped in cloth. The resulting powder was rich in calcium carbonate, a mineral essential for maintaining strong bones and teeth. During hard times when milk and fresh produce were scarce or rationed, this homemade calcium supplement was stirred into porridge, mixed into flour for baking, or even added to water or vinegar for a quick mineral boost. It was especially valued for children and the elderly, who needed extra nourishment but often had limited access to dairy. But the usefulness of dried eggshells didn't stop at nutrition. They were also scattered in garden beds to enrich the soil with calcium, deterring pests like slugs and snails. Farmers and homemakers reused them in animal feed, ensuring hens had the nutrients to lay strong eggshells of their own, creating a self-sustaining cycle of resilience. Dried eggshells remind us of a time when resourcefulness was not just admired, but essential. In a world without waste, even the most overlooked scraps held value. And through this humble practice, American families added strength, both to their bodies and to the soil beneath their feet.